From Microbe TV, this is TWiP, This Week in Parasitism, episode 252, recorded on January 17th, 2025. I'm Vincent Racaniello, and you're listening to the podcast all about parasites. Joining me today from New York, Daniel Griffin.
Hello, everyone.
And since it's Friday, you have some kind of STD on your bow tie.
It's syphilis. It is syphilis.
Treponema pallidum.
Yes, which actually, as we now, I think, pretty reasonably confident was something that originated in the New World and then was brought back to Europe, like tomatoes and potatoes and so many other wonderful things.
Also joining us from Glasgow, Scotland, Christina Nowla.
Hello, everybody. Good evening. How are you all?
We're just like in a tropical depression here, right, Daniel? It's
really?
warm. It's actually warm.
It all depends what you mean by warm.
Well, it's above freezing, at least. It's been minus C all week, and now it's above 0 C, but it's supposed to go back down again. So
yeah, I think this weekend. Last night there was a little bit of snow. I woke up this morning to a little bit of dusting of the locals. So yeah.
By the way, speaking of things coming back, I just learned on TWiP that Screwworm is coming back.
You know, we were talking about Screwworm recently. Remember when Ben LeBrat was visiting us and we had that dog, right?
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah.
So apparently, illegal cattle trade is bringing it back up from south of Mexico.
It's a disaster. What a disaster.
You know, it's always something illegal that does this, right?
I guess they will have to up the kind of the radiation prevention, the release of the irradiated. What was it again? Males.
Yeah, they irradiate the males, right?
Yeah.
And then the U.S. did that religiously, and it really eliminated it. But now,
yeah, it's a disaster, right? Because it was a process, right? So, you know, they took advantage of the fact that the females will only have sex once and then they plug. And so you release the irradiated males. And they over a period of years, they pushed the screwworm south,
right,
really to the Darien Gap. But now it's moved up and we're getting problems down in Panama. I'm going to be down there in March with a friend of mine and Ben LeBrat and my daughter. But, you know, if you move that back up, what a huge border we have with Mexico. And so just to re-undertake that, I mean, this could be just a really quite a disaster.
So, Daniel, the wall is not going to stop the screwworm?
Well, you know, that's interesting because they did talk about it as a wall, basically. So it was a massive deployment of these irradiated. And we're talking about, you know, tens, hundreds of millions irradiated males being released per month in this just swath. And then moving that release, you know, because originally we eradicated this from the U.S., and then we eradicated it from northern Mexico, and then we pushed it down to where the continent gets narrow there. You know, and I think it's like 60 million irradiated males per month are currently being released in Panama or some number in that region. So if you think about the border between the U.S. and Mexico, just incredibly expensive to try to recreate, to lose, you know, this ground that we're losing.
Are those facilities still operational that generate?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So that would just have to be upscaled, I suppose, and pretty
Lots
quickly.
Of money. Lots of money.
Yeah. Yeah, but you know, you wouldn't really want to have the screwworm.
I mean, it's devastating. You know, billions of dollars negative economic impact on the cattle industry, but also, I mean, as some of the pictures, it's just, you know, some of the older folks down in Panama, like the senior folks, remember the days of screwworm down there, and just what a horrible. I mean, so this is, you know, for our listeners who may not remember, this is a say screwworm, but it's a fly whose maggot very aggressively burrows in and eats living tissue, not necrotic tissue. So a little bit of a scratch or a wound, and then in, the eggs get laid, the maggots just burrow in and just destroy the flesh.
And really, really quickly as well.
Yeah, it's devastating.
If you enjoy these science programs, we'd love to have your support. Microbe.tv/contribute. It's time for a paper, and that's going to be Daniel's charge this week.
Okay, so I'm excited. This is a great paper, and I did a bunch of screenshots. So I'm hoping David will be showing our listeners who tune into YouTube. So the original article, "Safety and Efficacy of Immunization with a Late Liver Stage Attenuated Malaria Parasite." And this was published in the New England Journal of Medicine. And there's really a couple great features. One is that there's this nice, what do you call those? Where like your QR code, I think that's what it is.
Mm-hmm.
Where like,
Yes.
So it's right on the second page of the paper. It's on the left side, and you with your phone, and you click on this, and you actually get this quick take synopsis video. And if that's not exciting enough, our favorite comedic ophthalmologist, Glum Falcon, how do you pronounce his name, Christina?
I think glaucoma flecken.
So we'll leave in, because he's actually started this series of videos for New England Journal of Medicine articles. So you can watch him, playing the role of the infectious disease doctor discussing this article. But let's go through. I can put my glasses on and go through some of our authors here. And it's quite a list. And some of them have the same last name, but a lot of the authors, the correspondence here is the Leiden University Medical Center, Leiden, Netherlands. And they make this comment. They say that Doctors McCall and Jancy contributed equally to the trial, but there's a couple Jancy's, so I'm not sure which of the Jancy. I assume it's like one of the last authors, C.J. Jancy, contributed.
Well spotted. I didn't notice that.
Yeah, sort of interesting, right? So there's J.J. Jancy and there's C.J. Jancy. But so we've got all these authors. This was a lot of work, but let's go through background, context, and then data. Because I think this is one of those situations, I was thinking about it today. We always in parasitology talk about how important it is to understand the life cycle. And it's really critical, I think, in understanding the details of the plasmodium of the malaria parasite life cycle, and what are these folks doing? So this is another attempt to move forward with vaccine as an approach for malaria. And they start off, I'm going to kind of give some background, like where are we with vaccines? And they give a nod in the introduction to the two major subunit vaccines out there. So the RTS S/A S01, the Mosquirix, and the R21. And these are subunit vaccines based on the major sporozoite surface antigen, the circumsporozoite protein, CSP. And they comment that the resulting protection, they say is modest, 50 to 80%. And then they say short-lived. We'll return back to that. But as we've discussed these articles before, the current, say, protein subunit vaccines that are being deployed, actually, they require multiple doses. And so far, it's going to look like this is going to require, probably every year updated, right? So it doesn't look like this is a one and done type vaccine. So what they're going to do here is they're going to take advantage of the life cycle to basically expose people to an attenuated malaria parasite. And then hopefully the immune system is going to see that attenuated malaria parasite. It's going to educate the immune system. You're going to get antibodies and T cells and provide some immunity. So let's start off for our listeners with going through the Plasmodium falciparum life cycle from Parasitic Diseases 7th edition. And I'm just going to go through this. Actually, Christina, do you want to go through the Plasmodium falciparum?
Yeah, I can do that.
Sure.
So I think I'm going to be starting with the bite of the mosquito.
Perfect.
So when a mosquito feeds on a person, so the malaria sporozoites, they will be injected during that blood meal. And actually, it was really quite important to notice on the life cycle, because other life cycles don't notice that. It says sporozoites injected during second blood meal. And I think that's important to remember, because obviously the mosquito needs to get infected at some point. They're not transovarially transmitted, those parasites. I think it's quite a good point to make. So the sporozoites, they enter the bloodstream and they very, very quickly migrate to the liver, and where they infect liver cells, and they do multiply really quite rapidly. And then the liver cells, they rupture and they release the merozoites. And these go on to infecting red blood cells in the bloodstream. And that's when we really start the erythrocytic cycle. And that's really when we also start seeing symptoms of the disease, because during the liver cycle, someone who has been infected with malaria would not be symptomatic. But as we go through that erythrocytic cycle, that the parasites develop from ring form parasites, so ring stages. So these are quite dainty little rings for Plasmodium falciparum. Often there's more than one, up to 2 or 3 per red blood cell. So they will multiply and they develop into later stage trophozoites. And then they eventually develop into schizonts. And at this point, the blood cells eventually get so full, they will rupture, and another generation of merozoites will be released into the peripheral blood. And so this is obviously what is making people ill, because, the ruptured blood cells, not a good thing to happen. We're not going to go talking too much about malaria now, aren't we? Because I didn't prepare in any detail. But anyway, what happens is, so these merozoites, they can then go back and reinfect other red blood cells, and then the cycle continues. And that what kind of gives rise to the kind of cyclical fever spikes that you would observe in malaria. And I think it's about a 48-hour cycle, plus minus. I'm not sure how much the textbooks Plasmodium falciparum actually sticks, but I think it was referred to as tertiary malaria. So you would have a fever spike every 3rd day or thereabouts.
Yeah, it's interesting the way they count, right? So they start with day 0, and then day 1, day 2. So that 48 hours. But, I think it's great you make the point that that's the textbook.
Yeah.
But often Plasmodium falciparum or falciparum is so aggressive that people just don't have enough time before they come to medical attention to synchronize and get into that. So they often come in with just lots of fevers, not necessarily synchronized, several different erythrocytic cycles ongoing at the same time.
So obviously then the infection needs to be transmitted further onto other mosquitoes. And really for this to happen, the malaria parasites need to develop into gametocytes. And really this is going to be the sexual stage, because within the mosquito they will be reproducing sexually. So we would have the development of macro and microgametocytes. And they will then essentially, just lost the word. What's the word?
The sporogeny when it's in the mosquito, or
No. When the sexual reproduction, that's just a word. It's just at the tip of my tongue.
Too much haggis. Too much haggis.
Too much haggis.
Right?
Yeah, I haven't had any.
Yeah, it isn't even Burns. It isn't even Burns night there, Christina. You should be good to go.
Well, I guess maybe I could use the word fertilization. It's not the word I was looking for, but hopefully our listeners know what you mean. Maybe Daniel, you can think of the word. And then within the mosquito, the parasites then further develop until eventually they reach sporozoid cell sporozoite stage again, and then they will be ready to be transmitted into the next person. So that's the life cycle.
Perfect. And then for our purposes, we're going to dive a little bit deeper into this pre-erythrocytic period, right? So, Christina, as you point out, so the sporozoites are injected. The teaching is somewhere between 50 to 60 minutes. Those sporozoites end up in liver cells, in hepatocytes.
It's extraordinarily quick, isn't it?
Yes, it really is pretty quick. And it's always been sort of a challenge because as they point out, one of the approaches to educating the immune system has been basically using radiation attenuated P. falciparum sporozoites. So what they do is they irradiate the sporozoites. They inject them. Most of these studies are done in mice, by the way, but there are some studies in humans. And what ends up happening is the sporozoite gets into the liver cells. And I'll leave a link into this other paper, which is actually really sort of zooming in. A single sporozoite invades a hepatocyte, and then depending on the Plasmodium species, there's a period of time where you go from a single sporozoite to several thousand daughter cells that are going to be released from the liver cell. And during that period of time, this is not an immune privileged period. So the infected individual feels fine, but the immune system actually is seeing and is being educated during this period of time. When you irradiate the sporozoites, this is kind of critical for this genetic engineering, they probably only last for about a day or so, we think, in those liver cells. When they created their first genetically mutated plasmodium, the GA1, that only gave us about 1 day in the hepatocyte, so just not as much time as we'd want. And then we're going to talk about this MEI2 knockout, the GA2, where it's actually what they're going to do is allow 8 days, so about a week or more of the sporozoite development in the liver, but then it can't actually release to create a erythrocytic phase. So you're gonna basically modify it so it's going to get stuck in the liver, but it's going to be stuck there for
for quite
long
some time.
enough period of time. So that's really, I think, sort of the critical technology.
Can I just get back to the life cycle just for 1 second? Because there's something that I've been kind of puzzling about for some time. And actually, when you have merozoites that are released from the liver, and then you have again merozoites released from the red blood cells, and I find that really inconvenient. I'd rather there being two different kind of designations, because I think it can be a little bit confusing if you're kind of new to the life cycle, that, you have essentially infective little parasites that emerge from different cells but are called the same. So I'd like to propose maybe at some point in the future. Yes. No, that would be a bit preposterous, but just something I've been pondering about for some time.
Yeah, because it is a little bit challenging. Agreed. All right. So here's what they're going to do. So they've got this ingenious idea, and the whole idea is based upon the fact that the sporozoites, either from entry to getting to the liver or probably while in the liver, is a period of exposure that can educate the immune system. And what they're going to do, based upon that irradiation and genetically modification, you're going to not allow your subjects to end up with that symptomatic, disease-provoking erythrocytic cycle. And first they do this dose escalation. So they're going to get these heroes to volunteer, and they're going to assess them for eligibility, and they're going to do a dose escalation, basically to figure out how much of a dose should they get. And then,
would you volunteer, Daniel? Vincent?
I would. I love this.
Would you? I'm not sure. I'm a bit of a chicken.
So it's interesting. They, initially they have these two, so you've got cohort 1, cohort 2, and you're getting multiple mosquito bites. So cohort 1, you got 5 folks get 15 bites, and then cohort 2, they get 50 bites, and they decide 50 bites, that's the number. And then when they go to the stage 2, where they're actually going to try this out, they're going to end up, and this is a bit of an issue. You don't really have as many folks in each group as we would like, but so stage true. B, they're going to have 40 participants. They assess, 23 get randomized, 10 folks get 50 bites from the GA2 infected mosquito. So remember, these are the sporozoites that are going to spend a week in the liver. 10 folks get the GA1, only going to be about a day in the liver, so not as much. And then they're going to end up with this placebo group, only 3 folks in the placebo
Daniel, how do they
group.
know if you got 50 bites or 49 or 52?
I think actually in the text, in the methods, they describe it as 50 mosquitoes, but later they refer to it as bites. So maybe they just assume they all bite, more or less.
You're actually right. It's bites of 50 mosquitoes.
Yeah.
So they put your arm in a box with 50 mosquitoes in it.
You got it. Yeah. And then they give them a certain amount of time to bite you. So it is interesting. If we look at the figure, it says 50 bites, but it's really bites from 50 infected mosquitoes.
So you could get bites.
Yeah. But the interesting thing, right? We talked about this double biter. So usually a female mosquito will bite you once and take a nice good blood meal.
Yeah.
And it doesn't bite you again for maybe 2 weeks, because once it has that blood meal, then it's going to go, the eggs, etc. And only 1% of female Anopheles mosquitoes will ever even come and bite a second person 2 weeks later. All right, so that's and don't worry, you get to have 3 immunization sessions, right? So people are complaining like, oh, I'm scared of needles and they gave me this shot and I felt bad. I mean, you're sitting there getting bites from 50 mosquitoes and then you come back. And then you come back for more. And then,
I guess that won't be practical in the future.
Yeah, I think in a lot of ways, this is a test of design. Because then 3 weeks later, and this is important, 3 weeks later is when we're going to see, 3 to 4 weeks later, we're going to see, did this work? So just a little bit of comment back, because they were going into this saying we really need long-lived immunity. And, let's talk about if we really have that. So that's our trial design, which is ingenious.
And actually the figure 1, is it figure 1? Yeah, it's a really, really nice description. It's that kind of flow chart and also the kind of timeline with the mosquitoes and the treatments. I think that'd be really worthwhile checking out.
But is this really a viable immunization strategy?
No.
But it's not, right?
But I think other types of similar experiments they have done with injected irradiated parasites. So presumably that would be the route to go in the future.
But there will be some interesting. Let's circle back. Like, how do you do this? Like, how does it make sense? But let's first figure out, does it work, right? Is it worth trying to figure out logistics? So, the groups are, appropriately matched, but, they get rid of people who are a little too chunky. That seems to be a big exclusion for folks, but small sample size. And also, as I already kind of alluded to, just short follow-up. And then what they're going to do is they're going to follow folks to see how many participants are free of blood stage parasitemia after this challenge. And the GA2 does great. And so now if people are following along, we're at figure 2. And you can see with the GA2, only one of they say 9 participants, did they lose somebody, right? Because only 9 completed follow-up. They lost 1 in the GA2. We only get 8 completed follow-up in the GA1. We do get all 3 placebo folks follow-up. So they lose 1, so just keep that in mind. But GA2, we have over 90% or about 90% efficacy there. GA1, not a lot of efficacy there. So sort of, demonstrating that it looks, at least in this data, like it makes a big difference to get a week instead of a day. And placebo, they all fall off by day 15. And then figure 3 and figure 4 they're going to do some immunology. So we've seen, looks like it works, what might be going on. And so they're going to look at different antibody levels over time, but not a lot of time, 21 days. And then they're also going to look at some T cell, so CD4 positive T cells, but also these gamma delta, what people think of as more innate type T cells, which I think, like, as we realize, folks that listen to immune, the concept of innate needs to be a little modified, because even innate cells have some degree of memory, as we're even seeing demonstrated here.
Yeah, I had to look those cells up.
Yeah, they're one of my favorites.
I do listen to immune, but I just could not remember. Well, actually, I don't even know how to say gamma.
Gamma delta.
Yeah, gamma delta. My Greek alphabet is not up to, testing.
Yeah, Daniel, what is this? A phase 2?
What do they actually consider? Because that is interesting.
They're actually challenging them, so it can't be a phase
2-3. It sort of falls into phase 2-3, right?
Okay. Yeah.
So I think there's kind of 2 stages. So in one stage, they kind of look at the safety, and they kind of discuss in not very great detail the kind of side effects or the adverse effects that those participants had. And so I think pretty much everybody had kind of redness around the itch bite and probably some itching. So, and I think that was for all types of mosquitoes that they used. And then I think the systemic effects that they were assessing were essentially myalgia and headache. So that was, there were very little adverse effects. So I think that was the first group that they looked at. I think that was I think actually that's in the title, isn't it? Safety and efficacy, yeah. So, but from a point of view of side effects, there don't seem to be all that many. And most of them come from the mosquito bite, I suppose.
Yeah, that's really what it sounds like.
Yeah.
So it's sort of, you could say stage 1 was kind of a phase 1, right? So dose escalation and some sort of, minimal safety. And then, the whole terminology, right, of stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, and now we've run into this stage 2/3, where you are looking actually at efficacy, but small groups, so not a true robust stage 3 trial.
It's very small.
Yeah, very small.
I think it wasn't helped by the pandemic, because they did mention that hampered the recruitment.
And I guess just to clarify the genetics. So this is an MEI2 knockout parasite, and the MEI2 is actually this RNA binding protein, which is involved in the DNA segregation, which is critical to go to the erythrocytic stage. So successful merozoite. So what do we do with this? Does it make any sense? Right?
Well, the results are good, right? Because you got good protection, correct?
Yes.
8 of 9 participants controlled the challenge. That's great.
Mm-hmm.
So what does it mean that they controlled it? What is the endpoint for that?
So they were measuring the RT-PCR. So they were measuring the parasite burden in the blood by PCR, essentially.
Yeah, so they're seemingly arresting it before these challenged folks get the erythrocytic phase, which is the phase where people get sick. So I was trying to figure out how do you really approach this, right? So, the idea of making lots of irradiated sporozoites is, technically quite challenging. So I had a couple thoughts, like what are they going to do with this? One is, could you actually start to genetically engineer and just release these into the environment? So when you get bit by a mosquito, you're getting protected, right? Because if you get bit by a mosquito that carries one of these mutant plasmodium, you're going to end up with this intrahepatic 7-8 day exposure. You're going to feel fine. And then you're going to be immune to wild type plasmodium. And that was one of my thoughts on how to approach it.
Yeah, the problem, though, is that these mutant malaria aren't going to have fitness. They're not going to persist in nature.
I think that's the issue. Yeah, because they're not going to go on. You're not going to get gametocytes. You're going to have to keep flooding the region with these. Yeah.
That's not terribly practical, right?
I don't know. We were talking about the screwworm, right? What are we dumping 60 million irradiated?
Yeah.
So is there some way to start flooding areas with mosquitoes that are, infected with this? And they're basically out there immunizing for you. You don't have to, no cold chain issues, right? You don't have to go out there with your needles and syringes and vaccine cards.
The thing is, there will still be mosquitoes with normal wild-type malaria, plasmodium. So,
but I guess what'll happen is those, because they require the human or a primate host, is that will be interrupted because you get bit. An immune person gets bit by a mosquito that has, we'll say, wild-type plasmodium, but you're immune, so you're not going to get gametocytes. You're not going to allow the next cycle into the mosquito to occur. So if you flood an area, right?
Yeah, but we'd have to do it again and again. Also, we don't know how long you're immune for, don't we? I mean, they've only looked at 21 or not very long, three or 4 weeks. So
that's a problem. Yep.
Yeah.
Why can't we make sporozoites?
It's hard. We can though, right?
I mean, you could. The only way is to purify them from mosquitoes, right?
Yep. Yeah. At least this takes that out of there. So you could actually just basically raise mosquitoes. And let them.
That's true.
You can't grow them in culture, huh?
I don't think so. No.
It's hard, right? Remember that was the Traeger thing over at Rockefeller.
Oh, yeah.
So you can, but it's not particularly easy. So, yeah.
So I think your way probably would be the best, getting them into the mosquito and
then massive releases of mosquitoes to a affected area. But then again, you're releasing genetically modified organisms and mosquitoes into these areas.
Nature is full of GMOs.
I actually thought, though, it was quite a nice progression from their previous experiments where they looked at a different mutant that was surviving in the liver cells only for a very short period of time. And then, you still see some breakthrough blood parasites in these experiments, but really with the kind of new mutant, the GA2 that they're looking at here and comparing with one another, you don't really see that anymore. So I think maybe we're on the right track, at least with finding the relevant mutant, but potentially you could get even longer lived mutant maybe.
It's true. I mean, they also talk about a strategy where you'd co-administer, chemo prophylaxis. So, sort of a double
whammy,
pronged approach.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of logistics, and I think we pointed out a lot of the limitations, right? Is that, they say we need long-lived immunity, and 28 days is not, we want to know that 28 months, we want to know that, more than even just 1 year. But it really, I think what it does is it teaches us a lot about the immunology of the liver stage, and the fact that during the liver stage, even before you get any symptoms, you can actually be developing some immunity, protective immunity.
Yep.
So you don't want early arresting sporozoites. You want
it's hard. You have an approach that seems to work, but it's not practical.
Yeah. One more step toward a next generation malaria vaccine, maybe.
Right.
Maybe they're actually doing those trials now. I don't know. I haven't looked up the clinicaltrials.org, but that might be worthwhile a search to see if there are any follow-up trials ongoing.
But I thought it was fascinating. I thought it was
and actually it was a really readable paper, and that's maybe something with the New England Journal of Medicine. I think their papers are generally really readable. So they do have a lot of supplementary figures, but you actually don't need to go and have a look at them because the paper's so well written. Whereas some other journals, they're so dense that actually without studying the supplementary figures, you will just never quite understand what's going on. So I did really like that paper. It's well written as well and really accessible.
Thank you, Daniel.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you.
Okay, Christina, you have a hero for us?
I do have a hero. Yeah, well, I have two heroes, really. So I had actually planned that for our last recording when it was maybe a bit fresher in our memory, but we ran out of time. But really, with Heroes of Parasitology, it's never actually too late, isn't it? So actually, for this hero, I wanted to nominate the former US President Jimmy Carter and his wife Rosalind Carter as our heroes of parasitology. I'll be mostly talking about Jimmy Carter and the kind of foundation that he and his wife founded. But I just would like to mention that I think she did play an instrumental part in that as well. So most of you obviously will be aware that President Jimmy Carter recently died just at the end of last year on the 29th of November at the age of 100. So I think he actually had 101 Christmases. So what a lucky man. Mm-hmm. So he's survived by his children, Jack, Chip, Jeff, Amy, 11 grandchildren whose names I don't have, and 14 great-grandchildren. So quite a legacy there. And also, I just wanted to mention that his wife, Rosalind, she died a year earlier in November 2023. So I'm just going to talk a little bit, just a tiny little bit about kind of his background and where they both come from, really. So Jimmy Carter was born Charles Earl Carter Jr. I quite like that name. It's an impressive name. In 1924, and that was in a small town called Plains in Georgia. And he was the oldest of four. So his parents, they owned a peanut farm and a peanut warehouse and store outside this town. Don't want to dwell too much on his childhood, but from what I read, he was an excellent basketball player, which means he was probably quite athletic, which may kind of explain how he maybe chose his career, because after the school, he spent 7 years in the US Navy. So Rosalind, she was born Rosalind Smith a little bit later in 1927 in the same place where Jimmy hailed from. She was actually friend with his sister, I read in her obituary, which is how I assume they met one another, and they married in 1946, just after Jimmy graduated from the US Naval Academy, I think as a submariner. So after his father died, so Carter Sr. in 1953, Jimmy Carter returned to Plains to run the family farm that wasn't actually doing all too well. So his first crop that he was responsible failed because of drought, but he did kind of manage to turn the business around and got quite wealthy in the process. And he kind of started entering policy, kind of, a very on the ground floor, essentially. So he was elected to a series of local school and library boards, and then he ran eventually for Georgia Senate. And then he was selected president of the United States and served as the 39th president of the United States from 1977 to 1981. I always feel a bit awkward as a foreigner, really, not a US citizen, to talk about achievements of, I don't know, it just feels weird, but I hope you don't mind. You can read about his political career anywhere, really, in his obituary, Wikipedia, anywhere you like. So I won't be touching upon this all because this is Week in Parasitism, not in politics. But I did listen to an obituary on the Swiss radio that really stuck with me, and I think I'll share that. So this was by a Swiss political commentator to Washington, and he described Jimmy Carter as, and I'm quoting from memory and translating on the go, so he was not the biggest president in the history of the United States, but the president with the biggest heart. And I think that probably sums what I learned about Jimmy Carter sums it up quite nicely. So for me, the story really as a hero of parasitology, I was going to say a parasitic hero, but I was completely wrong, begins in 1982, and he and his wife Rosalind founded the Carter Center, which is a non-governmental and non-profit organization. So that was in partnership with Emory University. And the purpose of this organization was and is to advance human rights and also alleviating human suffering. And probably we should actually celebrate the Carter Center as another hero of parasitism as well. It's probably most well known for its work on guinea worm disease, which is a devastating parasitic nematode infection caused by Dracunculus medinensis that really causes excruciating pain and suffering in those infected. So I'm not going to talk about that because I don't want to drag on too much, but you can actually learn more about guinea worm disease on TWiP 37, and on TWiP 160, you can listen to a discussion on a paper that was published in PLOS Neglected Tropical Diseases, which kind of describes population genetic analysis of guinea worm in Chad. And that really demonstrated that humans and animals shared the same kind of parasite populations, which is really important in terms of control and prevention. And there were also case discussions. There was one case discussion starting in episode 135. So you can listen to those as well. So the Carter Center actually are involved in a lot of other really good health programs. So they run programs on 6 preventable infectious diseases, so guinea worm, onchocerciasis, trachoma, schistosomiasis, lymphatic filariasis, and malaria in Hispaniola, so not malaria kind of all around the world. And all but one of these are being parasitic, and I'll leave you to guess which one's not. If you're regular listeners to TWiP, you will know. And their work really focuses on health education and simple, low-cost prevention and treatment methods. So, for example, they have assisted in the distribution of 500 million ivermectin treatments in Africa and the Americas to eliminate or to contribute to the elimination of onchocerciasis. And another important health topic that the Centre focus on is to advance efforts to improve mental health care and also diminish the stigma against people with mental illness. And I think that was particularly Rosalind Carter's key interest. So let's get back to the guinea worm, really. So since 1986, the Carter Center, under the leadership of the Carters, has led an international campaign to eradicate this disease. And obviously that's not work that could be done in isolation. So it really needed the collaboration of, for example, with ministries of health and local communities, and of course also the WHO, the UNICEF and the CDC and many, many others. But when that program first started in the mid-80s, there was an estimated total of 3.5 million cases of guinea worm disease. And that dropped down to 14 reported cases in 2023. So that is really an astonishing reduction. So we don't have the accurate numbers or the confirmed numbers for last year yet. So the unofficial numbers were 7, but they will not be confirmed until about March. The disease has been eliminated in 17 countries, and as of June 2024, there's 5 countries that are still endemic, and that's Angola, Chad, Ethiopia, Mali, and South Sudan. And Sudan is in a pre-certification state, so nearly there. And actually, I did put a graph in our show notes, which we maybe can share, but you can see a really nice data visualization. Also, I put the link there as well on a organization that I use a lot, Our World in Data. So it's really a favorite place of mine to find accurate graphic illustrations for many health-related topics. I'm not sure how many cases of guinea worms were prevented by this scheme, but it will be in the millions. And how that was achieved, you may wonder. So there's no treatment or vaccine for guinea worm disease. And the same treatment has actually been used for thousands of years, i.e. the worm had to be extracted from a little hole, usually in the lower limbs, very, very slowly by wrapping it around a little wooden stick. And I think you can Google many pictures of that. That's really pretty good. I'm just going to check the time. I've got a few minutes.
I think we've even got like a picture in our book of,
yes, that's right. You do.
the guinea worm being twisted around. And it's about a centimeter a day you can extract it. If you do it any more quickly, you'll actually kill the worm. And when you do, you can end up with necrosis. You can lose a limb. So, yeah.
Yeah, and actually it's a very slow, painful process. And I think the case you discussed was a patient that had that done. And then obviously, if you have these skin lesions, there's often secondary bacterial infections, which really just make the suffering worse and also really prolong the period of profound disability. So really what the Carter Center did, they provided health education, and also I think they contributed a lot to maintain the political will to keep going, which I think is really important. So the Carter program was mainly based on community-based interventions, so to educate and change behavior. For example, to teach people to filter all drinking water. So I should have actually put a picture up. I don't know if there's one in parasitic diseases, but it's like a drinking straw with a teeny tiny filter through which you can...
Yeah, we have one, and I think I showed it on the last episode. Jimmy Carter himself actually gave me the drinking straw that I have, and it's a plastic tube with a little screen at the end, and you wear it around your neck, this beaded necklace, and you then can drink through it, and it filters out the copepods that are, have the infectious form of the dracunculus.
Yeah, it's quite really, really simple. And then obviously, education that could involve making sure that anyone with an emerging worm will not be entering water sources, because that is really important in preventing the further or the continuation of the life cycle. So we come back to life cycles. It's really important to know a life cycle to be able to prevent and control a disease. So unfortunately, it could be eradicated, this disease, but it is a zoonotic disease. And in that paper discussion that I briefly mentioned, it has been shown that this is really the same kind of worms, or the same types. I don't know if you say strains in helminth. I would like to say strains, but probably not. Subspecies.
It's actually same subspecies, that affects humans and dogs. We didn't know that. And maybe if we had, we wouldn't have been as optimistic that this could be eradicated. So that was sort of a late discovery,
And obviously it's much more difficult to kind of eliminate this infection, because you can't teach a dog to drink through a straw. It's quite difficult to keep them away from water sources. That is, but 7 cases last year, that's pretty good. So I think maybe community education, maybe tethering dogs when they're seen to be infected. So I think that is really important.
Yes, tethering of the dogs to keep them from, because when you get the when the uterus ruptures and you get that burning, the human or the dog wants to put
you just want to go in the water, don't you? I can't imagine. It must be excruciating. Yeah. So these are really quite simple things. And then obviously another strategy would be actually make sure counting, or having really increased or good surveillance to detect every last human case and animal. And obviously prevent complications. And I've already mentioned the contamination of drinking water. And maybe that could also be addressed by actually improving access to improved drinking water supplies. And also you could potentially use larvicide, timefos, to, in affected water sources that would then potentially kill the copepod, which is transmitting the disease. So I think that's pretty awesome what they did. So obviously Jimmy Carter and Rosalind Carter did not do that by themselves, But I think they really succeeded in publicizing this disease. And, if it comes to the forefront of our attention, I think we have a much more invested interest really in maybe making changes. And also, I mean, by providing access to really simple techniques that can be used to prevent the infections, I think they're well-deserved heroes of parasitology. And Daniel, I think you alluded to it earlier. You met Jimmy Carter. Tell us about it.
Yeah, so I met Jimmy Carter and actually Chuck Knirsch, one of our other Parasites Without Borders directors. Met him multiple times, and really impressive individual. I like the Swiss quotation. I mean, this was one of the kindest, most intelligent men that you could have the pleasure of meeting. He was a huge feminist, huge supporter of women. We talked about him last night because there was a close family friend who met Jimmy Carter during his presidency, and then he really worked hard to give women leadership opportunities. And I met him here in New York. It was a Museum of Natural History, and I spent some time with him as well as some of the folks that are involved in the guinea worm eradication project. So, tremendous choice. I concur with his selection.
I want to point out two things that he did, which I find good. So when he was president, he pardoned all the Vietnam draft evaders.
Wow.
Wow, I didn't know that. Yeah, and I think he's quoted to say that he's never started a war during his presidency, and that he took credit for that. And I think that's pretty good too.
Right now, we have no American troops in foreign countries.
Wow. It's amazing.
Are they not stationed in kind of not in war zone?
Yeah, not in war.
Yeah.
Anyway, the other thing that Carter did, he founded the Departments of Energy and Education.
Who needs education, Vincent?
So I have a suspicion that the Department of Education is short-lived, but Jimmy Carter started it.
Wow. Yeah.
Let's hope it lasts. But yeah, he seems to have been an amazing person. Really.
Yeah,
And what really surprised me is we've not talked about him as a hero before.
No.
Yeah, so we dedicate the last couple versions of our textbook to Jimmy Carter. Mm-hmm. And normally you put your thing and, hey, is you okay with this? So Jimmy Carter rewrote our dedication. I mean, really a man with attention to details. I had to go back a couple times and Nixon's like, I'm going to change. I'm like, you're not changing it. This is what Jimmy Carter wants. So.
It's funny.
It's good. Yeah, so that's my hero.
All right. The oldest living president.
Wow.
And he was married for 77 years.
Oh, my.
Imagine that.
Yeah, he got married in the 45 or 46.
46. Yeah, that was when my mother was
amazing.
born. Well, a year before my mother was born, and she's in her 70s. So, yeah, that adds up.
Wow.
It's astonishing.
I remember his inauguration. He and Rosalind got out of the car and walked down the street. Right?
Wow.
I
remember that, actually. I was, I'm old enough.
All right, thank you, Christina.
You're welcome.
That's a good hero. You can't dispute that one. It's TWiP 252. You can find show notes at microbe.tv/TWiP, and you can send questions or comments. And when we have our clinical case, you can send your guesses to TWiP at microbe.tv. Today is January 17th. We released the next clinical case today. You're not going to hear this for 2 more weeks, but hopefully you'll get working on that. And as I said before, if you like our work, please support us, microbe.tv/contribute. Daniel Griffin is at Columbia University Irving Medical Center, parasiteswithoutborders.com. Thank you, Daniel.
Oh, thank you, and everyone be safe.
Christina Nowla is at Glasgow University, and Christina-Nowla on Blue Sky. Thank you, Christina.
Thank you for having yet another really interesting discussion. I really enjoyed this evening, and have a good weekend, everybody.
I'm Vincent Racaniello. You can find me at microbe.tv. I'd like to thank the American Society for Microbiology for their support of TWiP and Ronald Jenkins for the music. You've been listening to This Week in Parasitism. Thanks for joining us. We'll be back soon.
Another TWiP is parasitic.
Let's do it again. Do it again because let me do it again and then you say it, okay?
Oh, I thought we could do it as a group, but yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
that never works. We used to try that.
It's
It's always a mess. You do it, Christina. You've been listening to This Week in Parasitism. Thanks for joining us. We'll be back soon.
Another TWiP is parasitic.